The American push to reclaim Guadalcanal from the Japanese got a major boost on August 22, 1942, when the 67th Fighter Squadron arrived just after 11 a.m. The silence over Henderson Field was shattered by the sound of airplane engines. Marines, weary from battle and dug into their foxholes, looked up to see 5 long-nosed aircraft circling above. They erupted in cheers as the word U.S. Army, marked clearly on the wings, confirmed that reinforcements had arrived. The 13,000 Marines stationed on the island, often referred to as Cactus, were no longer alone. The Army Air Forces had sent pilots from the 67th Fighter Squadron, flying sleek P-400 Airacobras, to help protect the island from relentless Japanese attacks. Initially, the Army aircraft were expected to be a game-changer. These well-armed interceptors appeared to be just what was needed to stop the Japanese bombers that had flown unchallenged over American positions for weeks. But in combat, the P-400s quickly showed their limitations. Their poor high-altitude performance meant they couldn't reach the enemy bombers, and at lower altitudes, they were outmaneuvered and shot down by the nimble Japanese Mitsubishi Zeros. Many Marine leaders dismissed the Airacobra as ineffective, accusing the 67th of avoiding combat during air raids. But that perception changed. Though outclassed in air-to-air dogfights, the P-400s proved effective in ground attack roles. The 67th Squadron's pilots became a vital support to Marine ground forces, using their aircraft to target enemy troops, defenses, and supply barges. They often flew up to 5 missions a day, playing a key role in the hard-fought American victory at Guadalcanal. Their journey and resilience were evident well before they landed on the island. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, it became obvious how unprepared the United States was for a global conflict. Japan swiftly captured American outposts like Guam and Wake Island, while U.S. and Filipino forces in the Philippines waged a desperate losing battle. American planners realized they needed a strong defensive line stretching from Hawaii to Australia and New Zealand, including strategic islands like Fiji and New Caledonia. Troops and supplies were rushed to these key locations. Among them was the 67th Pursuit Squadron, nicknamed the Fighting Cocks, which had been based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. At the time, the 67th was understrength, equipped with outdated Seversky P-35 planes and short on pilots. When orders came for overseas deployment, most of the squadron's pilots were fresh out of flight school. The unit was held together by 2 standout officers, Dale D.D. Brandon, a tall Ohioan with a calm presence, and John A. Thompson, a confident and skillful leader from Oregon. Together, they kept the squadron focused, even as they had no idea what awaited them on a distant, underdeveloped island in the Pacific. The squadron sailed from Brooklyn, New York, on January 23, 1942, aboard the converted passenger liner Thomas A. Barry. The voyage to the South Pacific was anything but luxurious. With overcrowded conditions and minimal supplies, each man was rationed to 1 canteen of water per day for drinking, washing, and shaving. After a grueling 5-week journey, the squadron arrived in Australia, where they waited for new orders. On March 5, 1942, they finally reached their destination, New Caledonia, a French-held island 750 miles east of Australia. The 67th traveled on 2 ships. One carried the personnel, the other their aircraft. What those aircraft were remained a mystery until they were unloaded at the docks. Inside the crates were 2 P-39s and 45 P-400s, export versions of the Airacobra built by Bell Aircraft Corporation in Buffalo, New York. Most of the pilots had never flown these planes before. Originally supplied to the British under Lend-Lease, the P-400s were rejected due to their poor high-altitude performance. The U.S. Army Air Forces took them back and put them into service in the Pacific. The Airacobra featured a unique design with its engine located behind the pilot and a cannon mounted in the nose. The P-39 carried a powerful 37mm cannon, while the P-400 had a 20mm version. It also included a mix of aft and 30 caliber machine guns and could carry a 500-pound bomb. Despite its heavy armament, the lack of a supercharger made it ineffective at high altitudes. Complicating matters, the oxygen systems on the planes were incompatible with American equipment, and no manuals had been provided to explain assembly. The squadron's first challenge was getting the crated aircraft to an airstrip 35 kilometers from the port. Workers used leased trucks to haul the 10,000-pound crates along rough roads to a newly built airfield at Tontuta. It took 8 hours for a single trip, but thanks to relentless effort, all aircraft were delivered within a week. Reassembly then began under extremely challenging conditions. Master Sergeant Robert Foy, the 67th's senior mechanic, described using scrap wood to build assembly rigs. There were no replacement parts or technical manuals. Some crates were missing vital components like propellers, and others had bizarre factory errors. One plane's wiring caused the landing gear to retract when the pilot tried to operate the flaps. The crew worked through rain, mud, and mosquito swarms, and soon many fell ill due to poor sanitation and food. Still, morale stayed high. Everyone was focused on getting the fighters operational. By March 28, 1942, D.D. Brandon and John Thompson successfully completed the squadron's first test flight in a P-400 over New Caledonia. Although the planes were now flight-ready, much remained to be done. Brandon and Thompson began training their green pilots, preparing them for the intense aerial and ground battles that lay ahead. Their mission was just beginning. When the United States Army Air Forces officially took shape on May 1st, morale surged. The 67th was renamed the Fighting Cocks, changing its designation to the 67th Fighter Squadron and leaving behind its old identity as a pursuit squadron. The unit trained hard for the coming battles, spending the spring and summer patrolling New Caledonia in their camouflaged P-400s. American victories in the Coral Sea in May and a decisive blow to Japan at Midway in June had severely disrupted Japan's momentum. These battles kept key Allied positions in Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, and possibly even Hawaii out of Japanese reach. Supply routes appeared secure for the moment, but reconnaissance flights over the Solomon Islands brought troubling news. Patrol aircraft flying over the area spotted a newly built Japanese airfield on Guadalcanal, only 560 nautical miles from the American base at Espiritu Santo. If operational, land-based bombers from there could isolate Australia from its American allies and disrupt critical supply lines. Taking Guadalcanal became an urgent mission. Major General Alexander Vandegrift was assigned the task, and his 1st Marine Division, reinforced and ready, was sent to New Zealand to train. Operation Watchtower, the first major American offensive of World War II, was launched by Vandegrift's Marines in less than 5 weeks. On August 7, 1942, the invasion began. Although American troops quickly seized the unfinished airfield on Guadalcanal, the Japanese on the nearby islands of Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo offered fierce resistance. That night, while supplies were being unloaded, American and Australian destroyers screening the transport ships were ambushed by the Imperial Japanese Navy near Savo Island, resulting in heavy losses. In response, American naval commanders ordered the transports to withdraw, halting the unloading process and leaving the Marines in a desperate position. Less than half of their equipment and heavy artillery made it to shore. With only a few days' worth of food and minimal ammunition, the Marines braced for what was to come. Japan now controlled the sea and skies around Guadalcanal. With naval support gone, Vandegrift prioritized completing the airfield so it could serve as a lifeline for resupply and medical evacuations. He also recognized its potential for launching counterattacks against Japanese bombers and ships. On August 19th, Henderson Field became operational, named in honor of Major Lofton R. Henderson, a Marine pilot who died at Midway. The next day, the escort carrier USS Long Island delivered 19 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers to the airfield. These planes marked the start of what became known as the Cactus Air Force, a collective of Army, Navy, and Marine pilots who defended Guadalcanal during its darkest days. Back on New Caledonia, the 67th Fighter Squadron received orders to deploy to the Solomons. On August 22nd, now Captain D.D. Brandon led 5 P-400s on a 3-day overwater journey to Guadalcanal, hopping from Ifat to Espiritu Santo, and finally to their new home. Even with external fuel tanks, the P-400s barely made the 560-mile leg from Santo to Guadalcanal. 2 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers escorted them, carrying life rafts in case any fighter ran out of fuel and had to ditch. Upon landing at Henderson Field, the Army pilots quickly became familiar with their new surroundings. Gunfire from the front lines could be heard from only half a mile away. A rundown building called the Pagoda served as headquarters. A Marine briefed Brandon's men on the air raid warning system. A black flag raised on a nearby pole at noon, known as Tojo time, signaling the daily visit of Japanese bombers from Rabaul, 565 kilometers to the northwest. Initially, the Japanese bombers had faced no resistance. The arrival of the Marine Wildcats was expected to shift the balance, and Brandon's pilots hoped they'd get a chance to fight. Their first night at Cactus was far from peaceful. They endured sniper fire, jungle pests, and aerial harassment from a lone Japanese aircraft, nicknamed Washing Machine Charlie, that dropped bombs randomly during the night. No one slept, including the ground crews who had just arrived by transport. August 23rd was spent patrolling the coastline. While there were no enemy aircraft spotted that day, Marine scouts reported large numbers of Japanese troop transports and warships moving through the slot, a key waterway in the Solomons. These ships were part of the infamous Tokyo Express, a series of fast-moving convoys aimed at pushing the Americans off Guadalcanal. The next day, Japanese air power unleashed its fury on Henderson Field. As the black flag rose, the 67th's pilots scrambled to their planes amidst incoming bombs. Captain Brandon and Second Lieutenant Delt H. Fincher managed to get airborne. Marine F-4Fs shot down 8 of 9 attacking bombers, while Brandon and Fincher set a Japanese Zero on fire, marking the squadron's first confirmed kill. Meanwhile, SBDs stayed near home base and participated in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24th to 25th, alongside carrier-based Navy aircraft. The P-400 pilots often flew at mid-altitudes, where it became difficult to tell whether distant aircraft were real threats or illusions caused by oxygen deprivation. On August 26th, another black flag signaled an incoming raid. Brandon's P-400 scrambled while Wildcats soared higher to intercept the enemy. The 67th's planes returned to find the airfield cratered and a fuel dump burning. They had done nothing to help that day. The following day, 9 more P-400s arrived from New Caledonia, flown in by newly promoted Captain John Thompson. Ground crews worked quickly to refuel the aircraft, even as an air raid continued overhead. With these reinforcements, the 67th now had 14 P-400s at Guadalcanal. Still, the aircraft had not proven effective in dogfights. By August 29th, morale dropped again when 12 P-400s tried but failed to reach high-flying enemy bombers. Once again, Marine Wildcats handled the enemy, shooting down 8 aircraft as the 67th circled uselessly at 14,000 feet. Afterward, they returned to yet another shattered airfield. The 67th refused to give up. On August 30th, 11 P-400s took off to intercept a group of enemy dive bombers. They were overwhelmed. 4 were shot down, 2 limped back heavily damaged. John Thompson managed to shoot down a Zero despite being injured and his plane riddled with bullets. The squadron's 14 planes were reduced to only 3 in just 3 days. Still, thanks to the ingenuity of their mechanics, the remaining aircraft were patched up, The P-400s were no longer assigned interception duties. Instead, every time the black flag was raised over the pagoda, they were sent out on what headquarters called reconnaissance missions. But among themselves, the fighting cocks had another name for it: fleeing. The pilots went through feelings of betrayal and frustration. Even though they were incredibly courageous, it didn't seem to make much of a difference because the enemy's aircraft outclassed their own slow and ineffective planes. One pilot, Brandon, remarked that they thought they were a fighter squadron, but going up against a Zero meant certain defeat. Major Jen Vandergrift was so disappointed with the Airacobras' performance in air-to-air combat that he begged his superiors not to send him any more Bell aircraft. In his diary, he wrote that the P-400 was nearly useless in high-altitude combat. However, his Marines could still benefit from the actions of the 67th Fighter Squadron, despite their poor equipment. In September, their mission changed, and so did their base. Due to overcrowding at Henderson Field, engineers opened a new landing strip about a mile to the east, called Fighter 1, or the Cow Pasture. On September 2nd, the Airacobras flew their first mission from this new base at dawn. Major D.D. Brandon, recently promoted, led 4 planes each armed with a 500-pound bomb to target Japanese barges near Tambo. After dropping their bombs, they turned back to attack Japanese troops waiting on the shore. One pilot claimed the red X on the sea was made by the gunfire from their planes. 2 hours later, they flew another mission over the same area, returning to the cow pasture for refueling and rearming. This became a daily routine, flying missions from sunrise to sunset. They earned the nickname Jagdstaffel, a mispronounced version of the German word for fighter squadron. The 67th struck the Tokyo Express with as many planes as their hard-working ground crew could get in the air, often flying up to 5 sorties a day. When barge hunting didn't yield much, they switched to supporting the Marines on the ground with low-altitude attacks on enemy troops and supply points. These dangerous close support missions gave them a new purpose and directly helped the Marines hold on to Guadalcanal. At the beginning of September, the Japanese intensified their efforts to retake Guadalcanal. Their warships heavily bombarded American positions while transport ships delivered thousands of soldiers nearly every night. Fuel depots and aircraft were destroyed in the bombings. Men hid in foxholes during the relentless shelling, expecting a major ground assault. While waiting for that attack, the 67th Fighter Squadron struggled to survive the island's harsh conditions. Disease, poor food, and the jungle climate wore them down. Typhus, carried by massive rats, was a constant threat. Malaria from mosquitoes and a diet of canned sardines and cold rice caused many to fall ill. Clothing and equipment deteriorated in the hot, damp air. The days were hot and dusty, but heavy tropical rains turned roads and airstrips to mud. As one Marine put it, Guadalcanal was the only place on Earth where you could stand knee-deep in mud and still get dust in your eyes. Shortages of supplies, especially aviation fuel, often interrupted operations. The 67th had to use improvised bombs made from depth charges wrapped in chains. When spare parts and proper tools were unavailable, mechanics had to find creative solutions to keep the P-400s flying. Damaged aircraft that would have been scrapped elsewhere were repaired. One badly damaged Airacobra was rebuilt using parts from a wrecked P-39. Mechanics even rebalanced the propeller blades with melted lead. This plane, dubbed the Resurrection, kept flying over Guadalcanal for months. Meanwhile, 2,400 battle-hardened Japanese soldiers under Major General Kawaguchi were quietly moving into position around the American defenses. The situation worsened. Almost every night, naval bombardments and air raids shook the island. On September 12th, a 1,000-pound bomb exploded just 50 feet from Major Brandon's command bunker, nearly burying him alive. He was wounded by shrapnel and had to be evacuated. Captain Thompson took over command of the 67th. That night, the Japanese bombardment targeted American positions on a grassy slope south of the usual target, Henderson Field. Troops from Kawaguchi's 35th Brigade advanced as soon as the shelling stopped. They were met by fierce resistance from the 1st Marine Raider Battalion and the 1st Parachute Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt "Red Mike" Edson, leading the defense, knew this was only the beginning. He warned that the Japanese would return on the 13th. Sure enough, shortly after midnight, they attacked again, pushing Edson's Marines back halfway across the slope. Despite American artillery and mortar fire, the Japanese kept coming. Things became critical. Edson committed his last reserves to defend what became known as Edson's Ridge. If the Japanese had taken it, they would have gained control of the airfield and possibly retaken the island. At around 3 a.m. on September 14th, Captain John Thompson of the 67th was awakened and sent to receive orders. A battered Marine officer from Edson's unit showed him a rough sketch of the ridge and asked for air support. Thompson realized the 67th had to act fast. With only 3 Airacobras ready and fueled, Thompson, along with Lieutenants B. Davis and Brian Brown, launched at dawn. They flew low over the trees and found hundreds of Japanese soldiers preparing to attack. Thompson dove in first, opening fire on the enemy troops. Davis and Brown followed. Brown's plane was hit, but he managed to glide back and land without power. Thompson's aircraft also took damage, but Davis continued firing until he ran out of ammunition. Their desperate attack helped break up the Japanese offensive, buying time for the Marines to regroup. When the sun rose, the battlefield was strewn with the bodies of hundreds of Japanese soldiers, many killed by the Airacobras. After the mission, Thompson was congratulated by General Vandergrift, who told him that the newspapers wouldn't cover it, but his small group of P-400s had saved Guadalcanal. Vandergrift gave him a bottle of scotch in thanks. Davis and Thompson were awarded Silver Stars. Only 11 Army Air Forces members received the Navy Cross during World War II, and some believed all 3 pilots deserved the Medal of Honor. Even after Kawaguchi's forces were defeated, the fighting on Guadalcanal wasn't over. The Japanese launched 2 more major assaults in October and November, bringing in over 10,000 more troops. On October 13th, 2 battleships fired more than 1,100 shells into American positions, causing massive damage. Another ground assault followed, but the exhausted Marines, now supported by fresh troops and new equipment, held the line. New pilots arrived to join the Cactus Air Force, and older P-39 models were replaced with upgraded versions that had better oxygen systems. In the last major naval attack in November, the 67th flew with Navy and Marine squadrons to strike the Japanese battleship Hiei near Savo Island. The Hiei, like Japan's hopes in the Solomons, was destroyed by relentless attacks from bombs, torpedoes, and gunfire. Victory was still far away, but more American pilots were joining the battle, flying increasingly powerful aircraft toward Tokyo. The 67th Fighter Squadron, though, had been there from the beginning. Their courage, skill, and determination had helped turn the tide of the war in the Pacific, even when they were flying aircraft that weren't suited for the task.